back! It's another thrilling episode of GhoulRWM. If you are new to the channel, GhoulRWM is where I tell a spooky story off the top of my head while we do a spooky look. It's a lot of fun, and if you enjoy spooky stories, I'll be doing it all the way till Halloween, so hit subscribe if you haven't already. Oh wait, big red button, just boop. Got it? Okay. Let's get into it. I'm super excited for today's look. I'm gonna try and do a Trixie eye. Like, it's gonna make sense when you see what I'm doing, but like, I'm scared. So yeah, I have one of my brows blocked. We're gonna try. An attempt is going to be made. Pray for me. Alright, without further ado, let's get spooky. There's a fine line between genius and insanity. Or at least, that's what the town of Burkesville always said about their resident mad scientist. He was a brilliant man, but sometimes some of the things that he would do just didn't really seem proper, or what would be conventionally done. He started out as their town physician. It was a smaller town, and he was a brilliant man. They didn't doubt his abilities. They, believed in him, but sometimes some of the things that he would have them do just didn't quite make sense, but in the end, it always worked out, so they just went with it. Well, eventually, the town got big enough that instead of just having a practitioner, they actually got a full-fledged hospital. When the doctors arrived to operate in the hospital, they liked Dr. Feinstein. They thought he was a brilliant man, definitely a man of science, but they could easily see why the townspeople thought he was a little strange. There was something very odd about him, and he got results with what he would do, but they weren't necessarily academically approved. Since he was no longer needed for the hospital, he was free to pursue his own interests. And he was definitely always a little more interested in the science side of things. Free to finally do the experiments that he'd always wanted to do but didn't have time to do because he had to take care of the town people was really freeing for him. He was very excited. Well, the townspeople knew he was a brilliant man, so they were excited to see exactly what all he would accomplish too. And he did some pretty great things. He actually invented some medicines that really were going to help a lot of people. One of his medicines actually ended up being entered into the World's Fair. It's a very proud, very important moment for Burkesville. So, yeah, he was a little eccentric. Yeah, some of his methods were a little questionable, but he was entered into the World's Fair. Obviously, he's a genius, right? Like, he's not insane. He's a genius. He's saving lives. Like, this was a time when people still thought it was normal to have diarrhea in the summer because they weren't refrigerating food properly. Like, they thought he was incredibly smart. And they had the bragging right of their, town practitioner invented something that ended up in the World's Fair. So, while his methods seemed a little odd, and sometimes he would make some odd requests for items from the local general store and stuff like that, they tended to not ask too many questions, because he didn't really know how to explain things in a way that they could understand, first of all. And also, sometimes the less they knew, the better, but it usually turned out to be something amazing. Some sort of medical mystery solved by their, mad scientist doctor. And their tiny little town didn't really have a whole lot of claims to fame, really, Dr. Feinstein was it. They had someone of their town have something in the World's Fair. It was kind of a big deal for them. So when he warned the town that he was working on something major and there may be a lot going on, they didn't really think too much of it. They were like, okay, I wonder what it could be. But they definitely didn't want to stand in the way of some kind of major medical something being discovered, Like, what if he discovers something that really puts their town on the map? So they didn't think anything of what was going on. All sorts of strange equipment started showing up, and big trucks were making their way up to his house, and they just wonder what he's, creating now. Like, they couldn't wait to see what his newest medical discovery was going to be, that they knew they wouldn't really understand, but knowing that he was working on something major and it could really put them on the map, and seeing all these big vehicles, they were like, okay, it's definitely going to be something huge. Well, then he put out an ad for someone to come help out at the house. Well, everyone was speculating, like, ooh, I wonder what, could be needed. Well, in the end, only 2 girls ended up actually applying to be his housekeeper. And he chose Dorothy. Now, Dorothy was a quiet girl, which is why the townspeople think that he chose her. He didn't want anyone who's going to be chatting away while he was trying to work. He didn't like being interrupted. But also, she was kind of a big girl. She was built like a linebacker. So they think that maybe he chose her in case she could help some of his duties. He would be buying large quantities of stuff from the store, so he needed someone strong to be able to load and unload all these groceries that he was buying. The fact that she was very quiet and didn't really talk much, the townspeople tried to get some information out of her on what was going on, but they didn't really succeed until the power outages started. First time it happened, they were like, oh, he's working on something, and just left it at that. The second time it happened, it took 2 days to get the power back online, and the townspeople were a little miffed. So he ended up actually having to pay out of pocket to revamp the entire power structure to hold twice the amount of wattage that it was currently holding. While the townspeople had been a little annoyed, all was soon forgiven once he got everything fixed back up, and they just had some lights flickering, but other than that, they would never know that he was up there doing something. It became very obvious to everyone that there was something odd going on up there. They really just weren't sure how involved they really wanted to get with it, though, so they just left well enough alone. And then when he started asking the county coroner if he could have any unclaimed bodies, everyone thought that was a little odd, maybe a little creepy, but also he knew things about medical science that they didn't, and if he could study bodies to figure more things out, wouldn't that be a great gain for everyone? I mean, the man's a genius. Who knows? Maybe he'll figure out some new way of doing surgeries that require less, cutting, or find more miracle cures for common ailments. And they didn't want to be naysayers on the cutting edge of technologies. So the coroner said, yeah, that's okay, and everyone else was fine with it. They tried again, unsuccessfully, to get any kind of information out of Dorothy on what was going on there, but she said she just shows up, does some light house cleaning, picks up stuff from the store that he asks her to, and then she goes home. She doesn't ask any questions. She doesn't really see any of his experiments. She's not, in that part of his building. He does most of his experiments in a whole separate building. She's just mainly in his house. So everyone was really, let down that they couldn't figure out what was going on. They wanted the full tea, and no one was spilling. Well, the townspeople couldn't help but noticing, but after he got permission from the coroner to take the unclaimed bodies, the lights were flickering a lot more than they used to. They were a little concerned, but also they weren't about to go in there and start asking questions, because they knew they wouldn't understand whatever he explained to them. And again, he might be discovering something amazing that would really help out humanity, and they didn't want to stand in the way of that. Well, things started getting more and more amped up, shall you say. The flickerings were happening more and more frequently, and they just really weren't sure what was going on. They started seeing Dorothy less and less. She was spending more and more time out there, until one night they saw her packing up several days worth of clothes, and she claimed that she was just moving in permanently at this point, because he just really wasn't taking care of himself, and he needed someone there to make sure he was eating. Now, the townspeople had realized that he was really getting into whatever he was doing, because they were constantly having their lights flickered. But to find out that he was so focused on it that he'd stopped taking care of himself, they were getting a little concerned. But since the lights kept flickering, they knew, okay, he's alive, he's okay. And they'd occasionally see Dorothy. So they're like, okay, she's okay. But other than that, there was really no communication coming from the doctor's house. Well, pretty soon the doctor put out an ad in the paper saying he needed more bodies, and he was willing to pay people's families if they would willingly donate their bodies to him on death for science. Well, the town was on the fence about this. Like, that's an awful lot to ask of anyone. Medical science breakthroughs or not. They really didn't know how they felt about that one. But some people actually signed up for it. They had thought that things were really getting nuts before that. They had a whole new thought coming after he started getting more bodies and fresher bodies that didn't have to sit around and wait for people to claim them. Eventually, the townspeople figured they'd better get out there and see what the heck is going on. They hadn't seen Dorothy in days. The flickering had just gotten worse and worse and worse. They weren't sure what he was working on up there, but obviously it was taking a lot of resources and a lot of time and a lot of bodies. When they went out there, they were met with a horrible sight. It looked like some sort of major struggle had went on. There were body parts everywhere. They weren't sure which ones were from the doctor and which ones were from experiments. But they were definitely sure that the doctor was dead, and his machines, his apparatuses, they were all still running. Well, the sheriff was highly alarmed, like what could possibly have done this? Wild animals, maybe? They hadn't seen any, bears in town in a long time, though, so he just really wasn't sure what to think. That's when he heard a groaning noise. So he called out, "Is anybody there? Are you hurt?" He didn't get any answer. Well, suddenly, a figure emerged and started lurching towards him and his men. He wasn't sure what he was looking at, but it seemed to be a person. And after he looked at it some more, he realized it wasn't just a person, but it was different people chopped up and sewn together. He recognized the body as Dorothy. No wonder the townspeople hadn't seen her in a while. Well, immediately he unholstered his gun and started shooting, because whatever that thing was, he couldn't let it get into town. But unfortunately, the thing just kept lurching towards him and lurching towards him. He'd fired off 5 rounds right to its chest, and it was still coming forward. He finally managed to get a shot off into its head. The thing immediately stopped and fell to the ground. The sheriff was shaken, but he decided it was probably best if he didn't tell people what he had found up here. Just that the doctor had died, and his experiments were over. Nobody really knows exactly what Dr. Feinstein was thinking he was doing, but they did find a journal entry that said, "Mary Shelley might be onto something. Let me do some calculations." That's all they know. And this was this. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I can barely talk. I had to do a lot of this off camera. I'm so sorry, but it was very involved, and I have collodion on, which is like really puckering my skin, so it's really hard to talk. So I hope you enjoyed this. This is a lot of fun to do, and honestly, I think the Trixie eye came out pretty good. I hope Trixie's not going to be like, she thinks I look like that. Like, I think it came out pretty good. The eyebrow's a little funky, but like also I cut off like half the forehead, so like I had to work with a very small space, Trixie. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one. Love you. Bye. Woo.